Welcome to Share Your Bitcoin Journey, presented by Bitcoin for the Arts. I am Dion Wilson, the founder and executive director of Bitcoin for the Arts, a 501c3 nonprofit supporting artists with Bitcoin grants, education, and sovereign funding tools. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with a Mississippi-based author, a mother, a homeschooling advocate whose first book has reached families across America, known for pairing Seuss-style rhyming, storytelling, and one of the hardest topics in the world to explain, for living the Bitcoin standard through some of the most difficult years of her life with grace and faith. Her book, Bitcoin, A Treasury to HODL, debuted at Bitcoin 2025 in Las Vegas. After losing her husband, she rebuilt her family life on a Bitcoin standard. Today, she is working on getting her book into Barnes and Nobles and into schools. In this conversation, she shares her personal journey from grieving widow to author to Bitcoin advocate, how Bitcoin gave her time to heal, and why she believes the most important Bitcoin work happening right now is in the classrooms, libraries, and family conversations. Her story is heartfelt, honest, and full of wisdom for any parent or family who has ever wondered how to start the Bitcoin conversation with the people they love the most. Without further ado, welcome to the show, Lindey Magee.
Thank you so much for having me. That was a lovely introduction. I hope I live up to it.
Lindy, welcome to Share Your Bitcoin Journey. Before the book, before any Bitcoin work, there was a Mississippi woman raising two kids. Where does that story actually start for you?
I think for me, it starts with questioning everything. Uh, the moment I became pregnant with my oldest, I kind of became that person that questioned everything. Previously, I had not been that person. I was much more of a people pleaser. But my mom always told me to trust my instinct. And I watched her lean into that as I was growing up, and I saw where it guided her correctly in some pretty memorable instances. So, when I was pregnant with Bennett, this was in 1999, I had what I would call a check in my spirit about vaccines specifically as a young mother. And I asked Jeeves because there was no Google that I recall back then. It was Ask Jeeves. And I kind of set out to do the work to just put myself at peace about that. And when I went to enroll Bennett into kindergarten, I learned that I had no options. It was 30 doses of eight vaccines, if I'm not mistaken, or he couldn't enter kindergarten. I had delayed or opted out of several of them. And so back then, at that time, it was only Mississippi and West Virginia that didn't offer a religious exemption. And so that sort of lit a fire for medical freedom and championing change at a state level that's still burning. I co-founded a nonprofit and a PAC here in Mississippi. And ultimately, a decade in on that fight, we took it to federal court and changed the vaccine law here in the state. And so before Bitcoin was on my radar at all, and before there was a book, there was me just quickly learning how very liberating it can be to stop caring about what's normal or pleasing the masses. And at the same time, learning that the institutions we trust are most often the people or institutions that let us down. And I think that thread sort of runs through everything I've done since that time.
So that sounds like you may have had some sense of the Bitcoin ethos even without even knowing about it.
It's amazing how the leap from medical freedom to Bitcoin is a very small jump for
Hmm.
sure. Yeah.
You homeschool your kids. Now, that's a particular kind of choice that says something about how you see education and family. What put you on that path? How did it shape you, and how does it work for you and your kids now?
Ultimately, a homeschool was not something that I had considered early on. It was the rigid vaccine law here in Mississippi that unless I complied, which by now I am not a compliant person, um, I couldn't send my daughter Palin at all. And when Bennett entered seventh grade, that is the year that Mississippi started mandating the TDAP. And so I pulled Bennett out of school for out of before seventh grade, and that's when we started homeschooling. And it was a year later that Palin was, or 2 years later that Palin was kindergarten. She's never gone to school. Um, and so I very quickly appreciated that my kids were in an environment where I was the primary influence on them, and where asking why was celebrated rather than punished, which I'm not saying that's the case in a school environment, but I do know that it can be.
Hmm.
And I just love that I'm the one shaping how they learn to think rather than what they think. That's very important to me. Bennett especially thrived in that. He he was on YouTube consuming information about things I'd never heard of when he was very young. And that's including Bitcoin at 12 years old, one of my favorite things to think about and tell others about is, I learned about Bitcoin from my 12-year-old. But, Palin is wired differently. She was much more social, especially when she was younger and super creative. But she's learned the same foundational skills, question everything, do the work, arrive to your own conclusions. And, I've always felt like my biggest job as a parent is to teach my kids how to learn and to do it critically. So, yeah.
And would you say that would be one of the biggest takeaways between homeschooling and enrolling your child in an institution is that you can really shape how your children think and how they're taught to think?
Yeah, I think that as a homeschool mom, I just wanted to encourage a love of learning, pursue your interests, rather than them be in this box. In Bennett, my son is has a gift of rhetoric, which is not an easy kid to parent, but he really taught me as much as I feel like I could have ever taught him in giving him the permission and the space to pursue his own interests. And in that voyage that he took, he, I mean, was open to so many more things than what a traditional school environment could have been. And I don't know how well he would have thrived like in high school where things were so rigid. He didn't like math. And so he sat me down and had a chat with me about how, my teachers, and I'm sure yours told you when you're like, why are we learning this? They're like, you're never going to have a calculator on you all the time. I beg to differ. I mean, we do.
Mm.
So my son taught me that I didn't have to teach him like regular school did. I mean, he got his pilot's license before he had his driver's license. You have to learn math for that, and he's capable, and he did. But I did not force him to learn a bunch of algebra and calculus and things that would not serve him later in life. I just taught him how you learn those things if and when you need to. This is my dog, Ivanka. Come here. This is very much real life.
I
Come here.
love this. This is exactly what we want.
Lie down. Lie down and be quiet.
That's it. So let me make sure I'm understanding this correctly. Your son Bennett, who you homeschooled, who you knew did not have a liking for math, somehow taught himself a very mathematical subject of learning how to be a pilot, in addition to learning about Bitcoin at the age of 12 years old in 2012 At a time, even myself and most of the people that I've come in contact with had not heard of Bitcoin.
Right.
Is this, am I understanding this correctly?
You are understanding it correctly. Yeah, Bennett was relentless from the time he could talk. There's seldom a day that goes by, even now as an adult, where we're having any kind of meaningful conversation and I don't ask him, why do you know this? He just loves to learn and he's interested in so many different things. Uh, the dedication to my book reads to Bennett, intellectual curiosity is your superpower. We should have listened. So he continued to talk about it, about Bitcoin, through his teens, and even set his dad down at one point when I don't know, I would have to go back and look. It was probably 2016 or so. And he's like, Dad, you should take a second out on the Mooney. That was the plane that we had for him, and use it to buy Bitcoin. And in hindsight, that would have been a fabulous payoff. Of course, we did not listen. I did buy about $1,000 worth in, I think it was 2021, with some play money that I had, and I liked having it, but I didn't do the work to understand it. I had it in Coinbase, and the work came later when I had to.
So he told you guys about it. You didn't listen, like most of us. And he was persistent. He kept reminding you guys about it. He kept telling you different ways about going to get Bitcoin. And eventually, at some point, so what was that moment that made you say, all right, maybe I should take a minute and listen to what Bennett's talking about?
Well, I always listened, and so did his dad. Like we listened because he was a compelling, like I said, gifted in
Yeah.
rhetoric. But especially way back then, and he was 12. And even whenever he was older, I know that he really honed in on Chuck to talk about it when he was a little older. And, Chuck was busy. He was, providing for the family, working, building businesses. So he just didn't stop long enough to do the work and have any level of conviction to take a chance like that.
Speaking of Chuck, we got to talk about Chuck.
Yeah.
Losing him is the moment of your story where it pivots. Take us in only as far as you want to take us. But the audience really needs to understand the weight of what that meant for the family and what it asked of you.
Okay. Um, we were married for 25 years. I'm very proud of that. Um, Chuck was the hardest worker I've ever known, an amazing provider, incredible father. He was a successful serial entrepreneur, built many businesses throughout our time together. And definitely the most disciplined human being I've ever met. He weight trained at least 5 days a week for the 27 years that I knew him. And he was stoic even on the worst days of his battle with cancer. And it was ultimately cancer. He was diagnosed with cancer and passed away in early August of 2024. And despite his insistence that I talk with him about our finances, when he was sick, I refused because in my mind that means he's not going to make it. I just shut down that conversation at every turn. And I was basically a passenger princess in our finances throughout our whole marriage, which I was proud to be. I was happy to be. I mean, he took care of everything. So that's on me. It's a regret that I have, but at the same time, things work out. I went from being a full-time caregiver. We did everything naturally. Uh, and, that occupied much of the previous 2 years before he passed away. I went from that to financial uncertainty, buried in bills because insurance doesn't cover any of the things that we use to work to heal him. And bank statements, just trying to figure things out.
So after Chuck, you found Bitcoin in a different way, not as the Bennett 12-year-old advice, but as something you needed to validate yourself. When did Bitcoin go from an idea to lifeline?
I've asked myself before, I wonder if it were not for him talking about Bitcoin when he was young, if it would even be a vocabulary word for me, if I would have even like gone there. But, after Chuck passed, I knew that money would be an issue. I didn't have a traditional income. I had always stayed home and, you know, full-time caregiver, homeschool mom for a couple years during his battle. And I really, when he passed away, I didn't have a whole lot left to give of myself. And I knew finances were going to be an issue. Palin was 15 at the time. I felt like I had neglected her for a couple of years and that I really needed to really pour into her. And that's what I wanted to do. And so I knew that there was life insurance. And I just felt so convicted. And no doubt that's the Holy Spirit that I needed to know more about Bitcoin. I felt like I don't know about Bitcoin, but I feel like this life insurance needs to go into Bitcoin. So it was like it wasn't casual, it was like urgent. And one thing that I know I'm good at is researching. Like I'm confident in my ability to research and understand things that don't come easily to me. So I studied Bitcoin like it was my full-time paid job. I consumed everything, podcasts, I read books, I audibled books, anything I could find, hours and hours. I went straight from pouring myself into caregiving, trying to heal my husband, to, getting whatever degree you would get in Bitcoin. And I definitely did it in the reverse order. I know most people, you study first and then decide, but I was so convicted over it. And so I set out to validate that conviction. And that's ultimately what I did. And so I used the life insurance that Chuck left and I put it into Bitcoin. And that decision is the reason why Palin and I have a roof over our heads today, and that I was able to have the freedom to pour into her versus be stressed out over finances and have to go get, a 9 to 5 job.
This is the most remarkable Bitcoin story I have ever heard. I want to make sure the audience understands this. We got to break this down. We have a woman whose family has just taken a serious turn. She lost her life partner, the father of her children. They had bills, they had family needs, they had everything that a typical family would have to deal with in the society and the world we live in. And you had one lifeline, and you had to make the best decision on what you needed to do from the situation that you were in to take care of your family. And you chose to choose a technology that in today's society in 2026 is being heavily scrutinized and heavily told that it is a scam, that it is for criminals, that it is corrupt, that it is bad, and that everybody should stay away from it. And the last thing you should do is keep it in self custody. Through all of that noise, you had to take care of two children, and you made a decision to choose something known as Bitcoin to save your family's life. I really hope this resonates with somebody. You describe Bitcoin as something that gave you time to heal, time to raise your daughter, and time to be home. Walk us through what that actually looks like day to day of a life of a Mississippi widow living on a Bitcoin standard.
Well, I mean, were it not for Bitcoin, I'd never have been able to slow down and just breathe for a minute after coming out of the most horrific season of my life. And my biggest concern in that moment was being present for Palin following such a brutal few years for all of us. And Bitcoin gave me that peace because I felt confident in I was doing the right thing to make what Chuck, bless him for leaving us, life insurance. I had something to work with for sure. But, to the peace and the time and not worrying about or worrying about finances is probably one of the most stressful things there is. I mean, I watched Chuck deal with that, and I was free from that burden for our entire marriage because he took it on. And I couldn't be the mom I need to be to Palin if it wouldn't have been for the opportunity that Bitcoin gave me to not be stressed out about finances. And it certainly wouldn't have given me space to be creative. And as far as you asked about being living on a Bitcoin standard, that was sort of an accident that I arrived to living on a Bitcoin standard as soon as I did. I had held out because I studied Bitcoin and I knew what the statistics were for holding for 3 years, holding 4 years. Um, but I got hit with unexpected bills that and so I depleted my fiat money ahead of where I thought I would. But I do live on a Bitcoin standard now, and that, thank God for Strike Bill Pay. It became a thing the moment that my fiat money was drying up. And so my mortgage, electric, cell phone, internet, all those things are paid in sats that convert to dollars the moment that they hit. It's like a bank account. You have an account number, a routing number, and so that stuff I have set up on auto pay. And then groceries, fuel, things like that. Uh, I have the Coinbase debit card. And so for each of these two things, I have my Bitcoin in cold storage, and at the beginning of each month, I move over onto my Coinbase debit card or into Strike what I need for that month. So I do self-custody and I just move over what I need each month and live off of Bitcoin. But I mean, Bitcoin is my emergency fund. It's it's the loan that bought the RV that I'm sure we'll get into later. Um, I feel like it might sound radical until you're actually doing it. And I've actually been on X Spaces where people that I totally respect will be like, nobody lives on a Bitcoin standard. That's not real. I mean, I do have a traditional checking account, but there's very little in it. And living on a Bitcoin standard, we're in a bear market, so things are not beautiful right this minute. But for the entire time I've been on it, I have been living our lives at sometimes more than half off. I mean, if you do the math. And so that has allowed the life insurance that Chuck left me to go twice as far or more for the majority of the time that I've used it.
You took fiat and you're telling us that you made fiat extend twice as far? How is that possible in a world where we live in inflation, when everybody is losing value in fiat? So you're telling us that it is very much possible to live a life on a Bitcoin standard. Lindy is giving us the rails that she is using to make it possible for her to create value for her life and her family. This is the best story I have heard about how to live on a Bitcoin standard, giving extreme examples of how you can actually make it happen. It's no longer an idea, ladies and gentlemen. It is possible to live in a sound money system. Let's talk a little bit about your faith. Your faith is part of the story. You said Jesus is king and that Bitcoin is what the Lord allowed to bless you. Talk to us about those two convictions. How do they work together?
Well, the two convictions work together very naturally. And I mean that literally. It's not something that I force together, but something that I can't separate. Um, I mean, scripture's not silent on honest money. There's differing weights and differing measures. The Lord detests them both. That's from Proverbs. And I believe that the Lord cares about fairness and about justice, and that involves weights and measures, and fiat is not fair. When I look at the monetary system that steals from savers, that's what it does through inflation, and that punishes the poor, debases the currency while telling everyone that everything's fine, and even tries to make it sound good. Um, to me, that's something that offends the very character of who God is. Uh, Righteousness and justice are the foundation of his throne. And certainly, Bitcoin doesn't fix everything. Some might argue that it does, but it fixes the money. And I believe that matters. So, the conviction that I felt to learn about Bitcoin, I believe that was 1000% the Holy Spirit. And I set out to confirm it and did.
Amazing. Let's talk a little bit about your book. You call yourself an accidental author. The book started not as a publishing project, but as something you were writing to understand Bitcoin yourself. So walk us through how it actually came together.
Okay, so writing a children's book has kind of always been on my unspoken bucket list for as long as I can remember. Chuck knew about it. We had talked about some ideas that I had, but I never did anything about it. I just kind of had the idea. This is something that I'd like to do someday. I had just come off the heels of doing a rapid deep dive, into Bitcoin. And so my mind was still all consumed with that. Like that, I was very, very orange, just everything. I'm sharing it with people because I'm excited about it. And so I'm very one-tracked mind about Bitcoin. And it was actually New Year's Eve night that I was just especially missing him. Um, I sat down at my kitchen table, that night before midnight, and I started having some ideas, and I went and got my laptop, and I organized, like, just, you word bomb it and kind of organize an outline and started coming up with rhymes. And Dion, I looked up and it was 3 a.m. and I had more than the start of this book right here. And
Mm.
I mean, so yeah,
Hmm.
that it was accidental, but for sure it kind of just came out of nowhere and I had something after just however long I sat at that kitchen table.
And you just sat there and you just got lost in
I
creating,
did.
and the
Yeah,
time just didn't matter.
for sure.
I love that. The illustrations have been described as Seuss meets stats. Now that's a real creative choice. Why rhyming? Why bright? Why Seuss energy for one of the most serious topics of our time?
But because the seriousness of it and the technical aspect of it is complicated, and I feel like that's a reason why it needs to be fun. Especially for kids too. But I remember thinking as I'm learning about Bitcoin, explain this to me like I'm 5 years old. I remember thinking that.
Hmm.
And so, it has a glossary in it. That came from me thinking back to my time learning and thinking, what the heck is FUD? Like I'm listening to these podcasts and I'm like, what is FUD? I'm having to look all this up. So that's definitely the glossary is every bit as much for the kids as it is their parents. And as far as the rhyming goes, that makes something sticky. Um, Kids remember rhymes and they like repeat reads. I'm a mom. I read to my children. I liked books like my book. I wanted to write a book that parents would enjoy reading to their kids. So that's what I set out to do. And of course, that kids would want to read. The Seuss energy is very intentional because Dr. Seuss, I don't know if most people realize this, but he definitely proved that you can teach deep ideas with his crazy and playful language and illustrations because he tackled some interesting things with his books even. So, trying to tackle monetary policy.
So, like I said, you figured out a way to take an extremely, important and difficult subject that most people don't even want to talk about at the kitchen table, and you figured out a way to make it fun and make it something that if kids can understand, and if a kid can understand it, and if an adult is reading it to them, then your book is obviously a way for adults to understand Bitcoin as well. And I think because of Bitcoin, it is such a complicated technology with so many different branches, everyone should try to understand it as it's being taught to a 5-year-old. I think it's a great way to really break down and give you a full understanding of what Bitcoin can really be about. Love it. Um, so when you decided to do the glossary, that was intentional to try and get the parents in on what Bitcoin was about?
Absolutely. I wanted the book to work on two levels. So, the rhyming stories for the kids, and the back matter is for older kids and for the grown-ups that are reading it to them, um, to the littles. If you're reading my book, I talk about proof of work in it. I mean, even as an adult, what does that mean? What does that mean in relation to Bitcoin? The glossary was a no-brainer. I knew from the very beginning it needed a glossary. And so when I would think of a word, I'd jot it down and, came up with what now is the glossary. And then it also has a did you know section that I had a blast doing because when I set out to learn about something, like I want to really understand it on a deep level. And as I was studying Bitcoin, I found that there was like a lot of culture to it from the original developers and just over the years. I mean, it's been around for long enough that there's some history and culture. And so the did you know section brings some of that into it. And for people that are like me, I know that they'll find that interesting. The first purchase being pizza, what is HODL? Is it a misspelling? That sort of thing.
You said you spent generational wealth bringing this book to life. What did that investment look like? And at what point did you know you had to keep going?
That's a good question. When I determined that I really had something, I went from my original, thought of I'd like to write a children's book someday. And I'm thinking as I'm originally kind of bringing this about that I can do Amazon print on demand. There's not really an investment there. Uh, Very easy entry into having a book. But ultimately, it's not the route that I chose because I felt like it deserved more than just a print on demand. So I ended up doing the work again. It was definitely a learning curve to understand indie publishing. And so that's what I did. And Bitcoin allowed me to do that too. At this point, I probably have about about $30,000 invested in my book. Um, I did, I hired a professional illustrator, Kenny Noley, amazing. This book is nothing without his illustrations. I did some one-on-one mentoring with another successful indie author. I'm very brave, and it does show how much I believe in this that I went with a $10,000 first, a 10,000 copy print run. Most people don't do that. They'll start with like 500. I'm like, no. And part of that was my conviction. And also, I know that if I've invested and I have 10,000 books sitting there, I've got to hustle to sell them. So I wanted to put that pressure on myself because I really believe in this and I want it to go. And I did an offset print. Uh, and the book is luxurious. Like I have to say, can I show it?
Please
It
show it.
has, it
Open it.
has the dust jacket, but the book is actually black linen. It's not wanting to focus.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful dust jacket. I don't know what I'll open on.
Mm-hmm.
Illustrations, and then, pretty end pages. All the little details matter a lot to me. Um, and only an offset print can do that. I wanted the quality to match the message. So I think a beautiful book is probably one of the best gifts that you can give to a child or even an expected mother. So I had all of that in mind. And, I had a professional come in and build out my website, which I'm really proud of. And if I'm asking families to trust my book, I want the experience of buying the book to feel like something worth trusting. So the money to do all of this came from the same Bitcoin that's keeping my family afloat. It's been and it continues to be a huge investment for this book, but I believe in it. And so I've spent what could have probably been long-term wealth on a bet that it would matter.
I would say that's long-term wealth well spent, and you did it on a Bitcoin standard. You did it under the Bitcoin ethos. You used a low time preference and you created something that has generational value that will
I love it.
probably outlive the author itself. Job well done, Lindy.
Thank you. That's the plan. I certainly hope so.
So you shared that adult readers have this eureka moment when they're reading it. Do you have any stories to share about, any information that came back to you, any feedback?
Yeah, a couple of things. Just this week, a woman reached out through my site that she'd bought a copy as a gift for her brother, who owns a wealth management company. So that's exciting. And then she messaged me, I think maybe even the same day that she had seen a post that I posted on my Facebook author page that her 14-year-old twins wanted to buy their first sats. And so she had commented DCA because I was talking a little bit about DCA, which for people that don't know, um, to DCA. And she got the explanation and she replied to that it was perfectly timely because they had wanted to buy some sats. And so I had sent a link to Strike and how to do that to daily cost average to buy a little bit of Bitcoin over the course of time and let it add up. You don't have to worry about the volatility. You just set and forget, and you're accumulating Bitcoin. And then probably another very favorite of mine is author Michael Sullivan. He wrote the book Blood of the Bourgeoisies, not a children's book, but I did Audible it. It's fantastic. I don't even know what genre I would call it, but I enjoyed it so much. But he shared that his little boy was insistent with his mother-in-law. She wanted to read to him, and he was bringing her the Bitcoin book. And she resisted and was like, "Don't you want to pick another one?" And he just kept insisting. And Michael shared that he never in a million years thought that he would listen to his mother-in-law explaining the intricacies of Bitcoin mining to his son and the rest of the family. So I loved whenever I read that. And, the book, it's a Trojan horse. It's a Trojan horse. You buy it
Hmm.
for the Bitcoin uncle to read to your nephew, and you can't, I think I'm partial, but I don't think you can read this book and not be curious, not be curious. I don't think you can do it.
You and your daughter are currently living in a Winnebago with three dogs because of mold in your house. That's not a sentence that most authors would share in an interview. How are you actually doing? What is that like day to day?
Well, it's it's been one tough season after another over here. I'm not going to minimize that. And so I do have to fight off, some grumpiness and negativity from time to time just because of the situation. And I will not minimize how angry I am at the HVAC company that's destroyed mine and my daughter's health. My husband was sick with cancer. We didn't know it, breathing in toxic mold. I'm not going to say that it killed him, but what did it do? That is haunting. That is haunting to think about. It's cost
Mhm.
us so much mentally, physically, financially, but perspective is everything. I heard recently, I was scrolling and saw a reel where it was asked if 50 people put their problem, wrote it on a sheet of paper and put it into a hat, would you draw one or keep your own? And 100% of the time, I would keep my own. My situation's not good and I'm weary of it, but I'm still blessed and things could always be worse. So, living in the Winnebago, sometimes I'm on the mountaintop, literally. We went out earlier this year and went to some national parks, hiked Angel's Landing in Zion National Park, one of the most amazing things I've ever done. And, some days we're parked tethered up to my mold house that I'm still paying a mortgage on and can't set foot in and haven't since August of last year. So, daily life in 26 feet of space with my 17-year-old and three dogs. Um,
Mhm.
it's challenging, but you know, if we're going to endure this season, I'm determined to make something meaningful of it.
And you're pursuing the people that caused this
Yeah.
as something as well, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So what would you tell other families that may be in a similar situation?
Um, I mean, I pray for discernment throughout everything that I've been through, and I'm a believer. And holy smokes, I've depended on the Lord throughout, everything and leaned into my faith on all of this. I think for anybody that's going through a tough time, just do what feels like the next right thing prayerfully. And, not the next 10 things, one thing at a time. And one thing that's been hard for me, and I need to take my own advice better, is to let people help when they offer. Um, it doesn't just bless you, but typically I find that it blesses other people, and that kind of goes back to 14 years or more of fighting for health freedom here in Mississippi. I feel like it prepared me in ways for what's going on now. Relationships that I formed during that work over the years has come back to bless me beyond measure. Nothing I would ever have expected. But like the attorney that's suing my HVAC company, I would never even know him were it not for my advocacy work. And what a blessing it is to know him and to consider he and his family friends. Like, I know that I'm in excellent hands, and that is a blessing that came from other people allowing me to work on their behalf. So I think if you have someone that is willing and offers to help you, the correct answer to that is always yes.
That is a great piece of advice. And that is something that I learned personally in my journey. And you somewhere you learn that it is better to give than to receive. And it puts you in a position to open up many more channels and opportunity to give and receive. And it not only that, but it's just something morally, it just feels more correct, and in your spirit, you feel more of like you're doing something meaningful when you're in a position to give. And that
Absolutely.
doesn't necessarily always meaning that you have an abundance to give. You just might be in the situation to give according to what that particular situation needs. So, Lindy, you have been able to defy a lot of obstacles in your journey, and Bitcoin was able to allow you to deal with a lot of those financial situations without panicking. If you had not been able to find Bitcoin, which gave you the opportunity to save your family, create a generational book, and still be able to deal with the situation of your home, not being able to, live in a home and living in a Winnebago, Bitcoin somehow has put you in a position to be able to stand still and in peace in the midst of all of that. What would you say your situation would be like if you hadn't chose Bitcoin?
Well, I I'd be working a job that I don't have the health or the bandwidth for early on. Uh, I'd Palin, she's probably old enough that she could have gotten through the rest of school kind of mostly self done. Maybe I'd had to put her in public school. I'd probably be renting some apartment with unknown air quality, praying that it wasn't another mold situation. And, I probably would have had to, I'd sell things. I do, and I would have still had the life insurance, but it was fiat and being debased away. Whereas with Bitcoin, I've had the opportunity for it to grow even in a very short time. So definitely Bitcoin gave me time, to heal, to parent. And like I mentioned earlier, if I were stressed out about finances, I definitely wouldn't have had the creativity to write a book. So yeah, without Bitcoin, I have desperation. And desperation doesn't do the things that I've been able to do over the course of the last few years.
You just said something really key in those last few sentences. If you were stressed out about finance, you wouldn't have had the time and the creativity to do the book. So, what you're telling us also is that being in a situation in life where finance is not an issue, humans can then put themselves in a position to use their creativity and their time to do more meaningful things.
Without a doubt.
And this is what Bitcoin allows.
Yeah.
And this is the message that we want to send at Bitcoin for the Arts. This is the whole reason that we want to give, is we want to be able to have people understand by listening to stories like yours what Bitcoin can do and change for them in their lives.
Yeah.
And you have one of the most remarkable stories to share. Your son Bennett, who told you about Bitcoin in 2012, is now grown up now. So what does the family Bitcoin standard look like across two generations? What has he taught you that you wouldn't have learned otherwise?
Oh, so much. He actually recommended and taught me how to use the AI that I use for like my marketing content. He produced my author video on my website. I know that you've seen that. Bennett is a videographer with The Highwire, which is an alternative health online news broadcast. So the health aspect, he grew up being dragged to the Capitol, with me lobbying for health freedom. Now he works for an amazing nonprofit that does that behind a camera. I was an exclusive newborn photographer many lifetimes ago. So we definitely taught and inspired each other without a doubt. Um, the kid who tried to orange pill me before orange pilling was even a term is now 25, just got married this month. Um, I mean, the things that Bennett in particular have taught me, I don't know that I would have learned otherwise. And, one of those is to trust your kids' curiosity, even if it might like make you uncomfortable or goes super against the grain. Uh, he saw something in 2012 that took me 12 years to use or to see. Uh, and I love telling that story publicly now because I want other parents to hear it and act sooner than I did.
I found it absolutely amazing that someone who has only been on Earth living in the fiat system for 12 years understood the urgency of what his parents needed to adopt in order to take care of him. I mean, that is just remarkable. So, pa- parents on a Bitcoin standard end up teaching their kids things that most kids don't grow up with: low time preference, sound money, valuing time over things. What have your kids learned from living this way that you didn't learn as a kid?
Well, low time preference for sure is a big one. Palin watches me make decisions based on long-term thinking instead of short-term comfort. I mean, she's a witness to that. She sees me, not sell when the price drops. She sees my conviction. Um, I cook every meal instead of eating out. Uh, she sees me choose a harder path a lot of times because the easier one costs more in the long run. She's 17 and is surprisingly frugal despite being absolutely spoiled rotten by her dad. Chuck could not tell her no. She should be a brat by every measure, and she just isn't. She's very generous like her daddy was, and she's careful with money in a way that I think comes, or I hope comes from watching me navigate this season that we're in with such intention. And Chuck was very different with Ben when he was little. Dads and their daughters, dads and their sons, but he learned skin in the game that you work before you play, and he earned everything. But Chuck made sure of that with Ben, um, and I feel like Chuck and I balanced each other out more with Palin. So, everything our kids learn, I think the best opportunity we have to teach them is just by example. Just they're watching everything we do.
Your mission is clear. You want this book in Barnes and Nobles. You want it in classrooms. You want children to understand sound money before they have to live with broken money. What is the hardest part about getting from I wrote a book to this book is in every American family's hands?
Favorite question because I want people to hear my answer. Um, Bitcoin doesn't have a marketing department. It has us. And while I feel like that's its superpower, I also know that it's one of Bitcoin's biggest challenges. You know, I wrote the book. I managed to get it nationally distributed, which is pretty unheard of with a one-off indie author. Um, It's in the Ingram catalog, which is the biggest hurdle because that allows bookstores all over the nation, libraries, schools, to order it directly from Ingram, which is what they want to do, and you have to have a distributor for that. So I've been able to do that, but a bookstore is not going to stop what customers don't ask for. So the Bitcoin community, as passionate as they are about orange pilling the next generation, you know, I hear all the talk, but short of that, I mean, that's happening and the talk is fantastic, but it's going to require the next step. I'm asking people that this means something to buy the book, take it into your local bookstore, Barnes and Noble, Target, find the person to talk to, show it to them. It will sell itself. I do believe in the book. It's a beautiful book. And, ask them to order it. I just imagine parents walking into a Target, a Barnes and Noble. I mentioned the big, I'm shop small boutique, like I'm all about that. But I'm just imagining parents walking into these big chain stores and seeing my book on the shelf with Bitcoin across the top. And in that one sighting, I believe it can do more for mainstream adoption than 1,000 laser eyes profile pictures on X. Bitcoin stops being weird internet money when it becomes more accessible. And walking into a bookstore and seeing this book on the shelf makes it accessible.
The Bitcoin community, you heard it. We need your support. We really want to get this book out. I reached out to Lindy myself when I was we were in a X chat
Okay.
about the Midwest Bitcoin Summit,
Yeah.
and she spoke about her being at the summit. And Bitcoin for the Arts is going to be at the summit. And immediately I thought that it would be great if we could find a group of kids in the Columbus, Ohio area to read a portion of this book to at the Bitcoin Summit. And immediately reached out to Lindy with this idea, and of course, about getting her to come on the show today and talk about this book. So, Lindy, if we could find a way to get some kids into the conference and have them sit and for them to hear your book, what is the most important thing you want those kids to in the room to walk away with?
Well, I want them to know that talking about money doesn't have to be boring. And I want them to understand that it's, in a sense, a superpower. And there are people in the conference, in the room, sitting in my little booth, wherever it might be, in the Bitcoin community who care about their future enough to teach them about money, about Bitcoin before the system, teaches them something else. And really, more than anything, as a mom and an author, I want them to want to hear it again and be excited about it. To me, that's the test of a good book. When a kid says, read it again, then a seed is planted. And I know, as adults, when we read not a children's book, something that's more in depth, we can read it multiple times and gain more and further understanding from it. And it can be a catapult to read something else of the same nature and just, become curious about it.
Last question. We ask every guest this on Share Your Bitcoin Journey. If a $500 to $2,000 Bitcoin micro grant from Bitcoin for the Arts landed in your wallet tomorrow, what would it unlock for you as an author and as a mother?
Well, first, I just have to give you mad props for what it is you're doing with Bitcoin for the arts. The mission that you serve, I think it's amazing, and I'm grateful for it. Um, while I'm grateful, and I am, for the people who've been able to make the most out of this bear market, I'm pushing people, DCA, bump it up some. The Bitcoin's on sale.
Mhm.
I'm already all in, so it's affected me in a different way. I've had to kind of tighten the reins, and unfortunately, that means I've not been able to promote my book, outside of my organic efforts right now, which is fine. I'm doing what I can. But I am investing in myself and the book to be at the summit in September, which I'm super excited about. I have a booth and I've got the books. I'll be selling the books. I have a bestie friend who's flying up with me that's going to help me out. But I'd invest a micro grant, any micro grant money into booth materials that I'd be able to help me stand out and that would be reusable for years to come. I hope to be able to do this more and more often, to get exposure to the right people, a backdrop, signage, tablecloth. Those things might sound small, but when you're an indie author showing up with a conference of, 5,000 attendees, I think the difference between um, a stack of books on a folding table and a professional setup is the difference between people stopping and people, walking past. So I think a grant would afford me space in the conference that I envision and would unlocks credibility with the people who would walk past it and that it would convert into curiosity and into sales.
Where can our audience find you, Lindy?
My website with my book is lindeymagee.com, Lindeymagee.com. I'm on X at Lindey Magee. I'm super creative like that. I actually am on Facebook as well. Lindy Hughes McGee is my personal, and then Lindey Magee Children's Author is my page, and I am on Noster as well, Lindey Magee.
Thank you for being with us today, Lindy, and thank you to the audience. This is another episode of Share Your Bitcoin Journey, presented by Bitcoin for the Arts. Please visit our website, bitcoinforthearts.org. We do need your support. Until next time.